Frost SMG has a decent damage output, very low recoil, and overall I think the gun looks pretty cool. So for that reason I think it's going to go into a B tier. In this video, as you can tell, we're going to be ranking every single SMG in Rainbow Six Siege, not including Jaeger's carbine rifle or Mozzie's assault rifle, because yes, the Commando 9 is an assault rifle in Rainbow Six Siege. But besides those two weapons, every single SMG is going to be getting ranked on this tier list based on 3 factors. 1, its damage output, 2, its recoil and how easy it is to control, and finally number 3, my personal opinion on how the weapon looks. With that being said, let's jump straight into it then, moving on to the next weapon, the MP5K. Now the MP5K is basically like the MP5 but with a lot less damage output and a lot more fire rate, and with it comes a little bit more kick. Overall I think it is a good weapon. On some operators like Wamai you get access to the 1.5 times scope, and I think overall it is another B tier weapon. Moving on to its older brother, the MP5, I think that is an A tier weapon because it has that little bit more damage output, a little bit less recoil with a slightly less fire rate. For both of those weapons I think the MP5 in the MP5K design is a decent design of a weapon. It's not anything special but there's nothing inherently wrong with it. Moving on then to our next weapon, the VSN. This is one of my favourite SMGs in the entire game at the moment. I'm really upset that Capcan lost his 1.5 times scope on it, but I think this is an S tier weapon right now. It is so good, it has such decent damage values for an SMG. The recoil is extremely easy to manage, it's basically got no horizontal recoil at all, and on top of that I think the VSN is one of the better looking SMGs in the entire game. With that being said, moving on, we now have the AUG A3 found on Kaid. This one actually does count as an SMG, not an assault rifle, which I wasn't aware of before, but the AUG A3 in my opinion is a semi-decent weapon, but I don't think I can put it up in B tier with the likes of Frost SMG and the MP5K. With that being said, moving on to the FMG9. This is a SMG that I don't really use too much, I'm gonna be honest. I don't really play knock, and when I do play smoke I don't use this weapon, so I don't really have too much experience with it, but I do know for a fact the recoil is quite manageable and the rate of fire is decent, so once again it's gonna go in the C tier category. Next up then we have Vigil's SMG, and this is one of my favorite weapons in the entire game. I used to main Vigil for a very long time just because of the fact that I loved his weapon, and it is still a very good weapon even to this day. Overall I don't think it's got enough oomph in it to go up in S tier, but I do think it is a very easy A tier pick. Moving on then to the next weapon, and it is Alibi's Mx4 Storm. Now this weapon is extremely good in game. If you see an Alibi playing in your games, it's most likely because they have picked her because of this weapon. This weapon is so goddamn good. The rate of fire is insane. It does have quite a little bit of kick, however it can be managed by someone who learns its recoil, and because of that it is an A tier weapon, and its design in my opinion is also one of the better designs for the SMGs. With that being said, we are now moving on to the P10 Roni, which is one of the most used guns in Rainbow Six Siege at the moment. However, in my opinion, it has one major drawback, and that is the size of the magazine. So overall, I think the weapon has barely any recoil, it has such a good fire rate, but that limited magazine does limit what you can do with it. For me, I'm not too great with it, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick it in A tier. A lot of you guys are going to think that this is a violation to the P10 Roni, but I just don't like the weapon that much. Moving on then to our next weapon, it's going to be the MPX. Very decent fire rate, barely any recoil, and on the likes of Warden you get access to the 1.5 times scope. I think the design of the MPX is also very nice. I love the way this weapon looks, and once again I think it's an A tier SMG. In fact, on Warden, where you do have the 1.5 times scope, I'd argue it is an S tier weapon, but for this tier list I'm going to leave it down in A tier. Moving on then from the MPX, we now have the P90. I'm just going to chuck it straight into D tier. I hate this weapon. The P90 in my opinion is one of the worst SMGs in the entire game. It has a high fire rate but also very high recoil, does have a large magazine, but overall I would rather take the MP5 on operators like Doc and Rook. With that being said, let me know where you would put the P90. I think that is going to be a hit or miss weapon for a lot of people, so let me know down in the comments. Moving on then, we have our next S tier weapon. It's going to be the MP7. The MP7 is my personal favorite all-time SMG. I think it beats out the VSN on the fact that it is just iconic. I think the iron sights on it are also extremely clean, so you don't even have to run an optic on it at all, and you'll still get one of the best sights in the entire game. And overall, the MP7 can be found on so many different operators as well, so you have the versatility of choosing the operator that you want with the MP7. With that being said, then moving on to our next weapon, it is going to be the M12 for Caveira, and it is the one and only weapon that I'm putting in F tier. This weapon is such slow fire rate. It does have decent damage values, but because of how slow the fire rate is, you really can't get enough bullets downfield expecting to get a headshot, and because of it, it is one of the worst SMGs in the entire game. One thing I will say about it though is I do kind of like the design of this weapon. I do like the way it looks, and when you have an extended barrel on it, it does kind of look a little bit goofy, but other than that, it does look like a decent weapon. Moving on then, we have Echo suppressed MP5, the MP5SD, and there's not really anywhere else I can put it other than either B tier or A tier because it is still an MP5. It does get the 1.5 times scope on Echo, and Echo is the only operator to get it. So for those reasons, I'm going to put it in B tier, but I could also see this being put at the bottom of A tier. With that being said, the next weapon we have is Jackal's SMG, and this can also be found on OSA. This is one of the only SMGs which is strictly found on the attacking team, and I kind of like that. I like how it is exclusive to the attacking team. Now this weapon has a very high fire rate. It does have quite a bit of kick, but it also has a massive magazine, and I actually love using this weapon. I think it's actually one of the most underrated weapons in the entire game. If you like playing Jackal, try give his SMG a go. If you like playing OSA, use the SMG because this SMG can really pack a punch, and overall I think it is an A tier SMG. Moving on then, next up we have the Vector, and the Vector is a weapon that I could just never get the hang of. Whenever I use the Vector, I always find myself missing so many shots. Obviously it has the fastest fire rate out of any SMG in the entire game, I believe. With that, it does have a little bit of kick, but once again, it doesn't have the largest magazine capacity. So once you spray and empty your clip, which is going to happen very fast, you're going to be defenseless, and then you're going to have to reload. So for me, the Vector is either a B tier or a C tier weapon. I'm going to put it at the top of C tier, but once again, I could also see this being placed at the bottom of B tier. It all depends on how good you are with the Vector. Next up then, we have the Scorpion Evo found on Ella. It's going straight into the A tier. This weapon has high fire rate, somewhat manageable recoil as well actually, and it also has a very large magazine capacity. Overall, there's not really many downsides to Ella's SMG other than the fact that it does have quite a lot of horizontal recoil, so it is manageable, but at the same time, the longer you spray that magazine, the harder it will be to control. Moving on from the Scorpion Evo then, we have the third and final S tier weapon. It's going to be the T5 SMG. When Oryx had the 1.5 times scope on this thing, it was a laser beam, and it is the sole reason why his pick rate was so high for a few seasons. Since he lost his 1.5 times scope, he has fallen out of the meta, but the T5 SMG is still an amazing weapon. I'd love to see the T5 SMG come to more operators in the near future, but with that being said, let's move on to our final weapon of the tier list, the UMP45, which in my opinion is a B tier weapon. With that being said, this is my tier list for all the SMGs in Rainbow Six Siege. Do you agree? Where do you disagree? Let me know down in the comments. Click the video on screen and I'll see you guys in the next one.